So we are recording, and I'm going to press go live. What's going to happen, George, is I'm going to do an introduction, and then I'm going to turn over to David, and then David will kind of kick off the conversation with you.
Excellent.
So as soon as I'm going to click go live right now, I'm going to pick it up with the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. We are coming at you for another one of our live programs hosted by the National Museum of Civil War Medicine on our Facebook page. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. We have a special guest today, a familiar face to many of you who have followed the National Museum of Civil War Medicine over the years. We are joined today by our former director, George Wunderlich. George, how are you?
I'm doing fabulous. How are you, Jake? It's nice to see you again.
Yep, it is great to see you. Thanks for being here. I'm also joined by my current boss, so I have both my current boss and my former boss on the air today. David Price. David, how are you doing today?
I am peachy, Jake.
Excellent. So this afternoon we have a special program for you all. This is the latest in our Hope Through History series that we've been doing, focusing on conversations that do focus on Civil War medicine, and of course that is our mission at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, but to draw a direct connection from the past to the present. And that is exactly what our conversation today with George is going to be. For those of you who've been watching these videos over the last 3 months now, it's hard to believe that the National Museum of Civil War Medicine and many other thousands of museums across the country have been closed due to the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you all so much for tuning in with us over these past months as we flipped a switch and became an online digital museum since we could not be open to the public. We have been doing these videos multiple times per week, live videos like this one or pre-recorded conversations. These videos have focused on all different aspects of Civil War medicine and again, drawing those lines between the past and the present, which is a major part of our mission statement at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. To take a look at the past, Civil War specifically, medical decisions, medical care during that time period, and talk about how they are still influencing our world today. Y'all have been amazing supporters of this project. The last couple of months have been some of our best membership and donation months in history for the organization, which is amazing. Thank you all so much for your support over these last few months. They have meant the world to us. I feel like I've gained many new digital friends all around the country and across the world over the past few months. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for supporting the institution. If you are new here, if you are just tuning into this video because you're a George fanboy or fangirl, I know that there are many of you out there, George fanboys and fangirls. Thanks for tuning in with us. We hope you'll follow the museum here on Facebook or go over to YouTube where you can find these videos as well and subscribe over there. And like this video, share it, get more people involved in the conversation, tag them in it, bring them into the conversation. We are focused on having this be a two and I guess three-way conversation or four-way, since we'll have not only the three of us here, but also those of you in the chat. We will be taking your questions and we can answer some of those questions about Civil War medicine, about history. We'll be happy to answer those questions throughout today's discussion. If you do want to support the museum financially, you can do that. You can become a member. Go over to the comments, wherever they may be, on your app or on your computer, and click the link there. It's going to take you to our support page. Memberships and donations do support us. We are a nonprofit organization. We haven't had admissions to the museum in 3 months, so anything that you can give, whether it be $2 or a $25 membership fee or more, those monies go directly to supporting programs and projects like this one. To those of you who have already become donors and members over the last couple of months, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world to us. It also allows us to continue doing these programs. So thanks so much for tuning in. Like and share this video. Add your comments. Add your questions. And we are going to have a great discussion today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my boss, presently, David Price.
Well, thank you, Jake and George. It's always awesome to talk to you. And I get a lot of questions about where's the big guy? So
I'm hiding. I'm at a secret unknown location with the United States Army.
So really, tell us what you're doing now. A lot of folks know you're still in the executive director business, but tell folks where you're at and what you're doing.
So I decided that the National Museum of Civil War Medicine didn't have a long enough name. So I came to work for the United States Army, and I'm now the director of the Army Medical Department Museum. And it used to be the Army Medical Department Museum of, are you ready for this? The United States Army Health Readiness Center of Excellence Center and School. But they've shortened that name so that I could actually pronounce it without passing out. We're now part of the simply the United States Army Medical Center of Excellence, which is actually celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. 100 years ago after World War I, and it kind of pertains exactly to our conversation. The Army realized that they needed not only a medical school, which they had, but they needed a field service school, a place where they could teach medicine, how it's practiced in the field, and a place where they could use that training to assist in the development of new equipment, new bandages, new techniques, and new logistical and administrative duties. And so they founded back in 1920, we were authorized back then, the Medical Field Service School out by you in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And now that is morphed into, same institution, but it's morphed into the medical school, or the Medical Center of Excellence. And I am with the AMED, is how we pronounce it, just Army Medical Department, the AMED Museum.
Yeah, so I mean, when you got that job, it seemed like the perfect transition and almost the perfect place for you to end up. So you are on base but open to the public?
We are on post but open to the public. Well, when we're open to anyone. Right now, like you, we're closed. However, we do still take training groups, because the main purpose of our organization is training of medical department personnel in history and heritage of the United States Army Medical Department. So, but our classes now are restricted down to 10 at a time. In any one place, we can take up to 50 students at a time, but in any one gallery, it's limited to 10, specifically for COVID. And right now, the post is not open to the public. But when the post is open to the public, you can go to our visitor center just outside the gate, show them your driver's license, tell them you want to visit the museum, and they will give you a little map and send you right our way.
So we had to, I guess we shut down on March 17th, and we kind of saw it coming a few days prior to that. And we, had a sudden shock of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And like Jake said, within 24 to 48 hours, we were virtually present and had converted to all of our programming to a virtual platform. So we had to learn all these new channels like Zoom, which we're all old pros at. What was that like? What were those first couple of days like for you? And did you kind of know something was coming? And how did you guys react?
We were very similar to you. We knew something was coming, and the Army was being very proactive. And what we didn't know up front, I think the first thing we knew is the public's not going to be seeing us for a while. That was the easy transition. The harder transition was the Army has to continue its training mission, because the Army still has a mission, and we have to constantly have the necessary trained personnel to carry out that mission. So training across the entirety of the United States had to be preserved safely. And that was the biggest confusion in the beginning, was how do we get soldiers here? Because one of the first things that happened is we got a directive from Washington, D.C. that I know made all the public papers, where Department of Defense stopped all travel. So how do we get a soldier here? So in the beginning, it was kind of that confusion of, okay, what's going to happen at the Pentagon level to tell us how do we get new students? And then the next big problem was, what do you do with the old ones? Because immediately we couldn't just put them on a commercial airliner or put them on a commercial bus and send them to their next duty station. So we had this we had students that were heading our way that we didn't know how they were going to get here. And we had students that had graduated. We didn't know how to get rid of them. And so in the beginning, the hard part for us was how do we get the travel down? And they figured all that out, and now it's smooth as butter. But you know, in the beginning, it was a lot of meetings and a lot of confusion and a lot of people saying, where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, the kind of the striking difference between the military and being strictly civilian here is that it sounds like you at least had some people trying to make some decisions and giving you some directives. Here it was almost like you hear what people are saying, but then one level saying one thing, one organization saying another, and we were constantly kind of in limbo land or spinning our wheels trying to figure out what to do, which is kind of still in existence, but I think as things are opening up here in Maryland, where we're sitting in DC, the responsible people are kind of hearing what everyone's saying, paying attention to the guidelines, and trying to play it cool and do the right thing. So it's a challenge for us to get back into a routine of somewhat normalcy, and I don't know that there's any kind of timetable. So I think that might be the big difference between the military and civilian, is you guys will ultimately have a timetable, I would think.
We will ultimately have one. At this point, the timetable is really they're pushing it out 30 days, 30 days further at a time as they see things are either changing or not changing. And the other thing that's important for us is to preserve the fighting strength. I mean, we go all the way back to Letterman here. Yeah. One of his big things was, how do we make sure that we have a medically ready force, that they're not all down with disease, or they don't all have malnutrition? Well, that hasn't changed. How do we prevent the COVID from becoming a manpower drain for the Army? And so what they've decided to do here is these training centers have become like a little bubble. And the one nice thing, and it makes it so much easier for me, is the general says, yes, I understand that these states are opening up. That's nice. No change. You stay the same course. And so our course is to make sure that our soldiers are screened everywhere they go for training. And then when they finally hit us, we're basically in a bubble here. Although I'm not a soldier, obviously, you can tell because I'm too old and round. But the fact is, I come to post, I get my gas on post, I get my groceries now on post. Even though I'm a civilian, we've been allowed here to buy our groceries from the commissary specifically so that I can get in my car when I leave my home, come here and go home, and everything I need during the course of my day and week can be purchased right here on post, so that I'm not exposing myself, and therefore I'm not exposing our soldiers. Yeah. So it is a much more controlled environment, and I can tell you that the delineated lines of information have been extremely clear. We get updates every week, and we know what's expected.
Yeah. So in the civilian world out there in Texas, like in Maryland here and DC, we wear masks to any retail establishments. It's not, you don't have to on the street. What is Texas like?
Pretty much the same. If you want to go to the grocery store, all of the stores here have big signs, mask required here. For the most part, people are wearing their masks when they're out of their cars. Some folks don't want to do it, but a lot of our businesses have remained closed, not by order of the mayor or the governor, but because they felt they simply don't have a safe way to reopen yet. And we're starting to see pretty much every day additional businesses are coming back online saying, okay, we've taken everything into consideration and now we have a method. And so you see a lot of plastic, at least I'm told, haven't been off post in a while. You're seeing a lot of places have plastic panels that separate cashiers.
Yeah.
I was told the other day there's a buffet here in town that's very, very good. And what they've done is they've literally blocked off the entire buffet with plastic. And the workers stand back and you point at what you want. They make you a plate and then they pass it through a little hole when you have everything on the plate that you want.
Huh.
So they've come up with a way to do it. You wear your mask away from the table and they only seat so many tables. So I think we're pretty much running like most other places.
Yeah.
I think the only really scary part is the beach.
Yeah. Yeah. I go down to the Eastern Shore, and again, most people are playing it cool and social distancing, but it'll be interesting to see what happens, in July as even more things open up. So, we're watching all these things play out on television, and it is constantly amazing to me how what I see on television with the medical response, and particularly the military medicine coming in and setting up those tents initially during the initial outbreak, really reminds me of what happened in the Civil War. And, we live and breathe this stuff, so it was very obvious to me. And I know you're a huge fan of, and the inventor of drawing the line from the past Civil War medical innovations to today. So I'm excited about talking about some of those. So let's start with, the Army Corps of Engineers coming in initially, and it was fascinating to me that they had two potential hospital designs for these temporary hospitals, one COVID and two non-COVID. And then they depended on local contractors to build that. To talk about that process, and particularly, how it really stems from the Civil War.
Well, if we go back to the Civil War, and that's one of the things I love about working here, because it's kind of broadened my horizons a little bit. We go all the way back to the Revolution with a hospital that was designed by a doctor named Tilton, and his big idea was ventilation. And so he built small hospitals with 3 or 4 rooms, lots of fireplaces, and no windows. The windows were actually just open areas in the logs that had an awning of shingles outside, so a lot of air getting in. And he relied on the heat from the fireplaces because he felt fresh air was just a better way to go. In the Civil War, we had refined that thanks to people like Florence Nightingale and the experience of the British in the Crimean War, and a better understanding just of general sanitation. And so if you look at the Civil War hospitals, they're being designed from the get-go with ventilation, and they're being designed from the very beginning to try and have a good water source. And we just never have, thankfully, we never got away from it. What I find interesting is right after the Civil War, the Army was so big on this idea of ventilation that within a year or so, they were going to all of the posts on the Western frontier. And one of our historians here just ran into this and said, give us a report on the ventilation in your hospital, which was built prior to the Civil War. And the doctors were so interested in having a good report. Some of them are hysterical to read because they're like, well, yeah, we don't really have any ventilation, but the good thing is half of our windows are broken out, so maybe that counts. Or, we have 1-inch gaps in the floor that the wind blows through, and the windows are so badly fitted that just the wind whistles through it, so we think we're good. But the Army was already taking, immediately after the Civil War, was taking that ventilation and cleanliness that they had developed during the war. Even though the germ theory is just now coming about at that point, they're using that experience already to check their hospitals in the rest of the country when the war is over, to say, are we doing the right thing? Do we have a change we have to make on the frontier? Yeah. And that's exactly where we are now. So if you look at the pavilion hospitals in the Civil War, with the various ward systems set up the way they were, and you look at a modern one of those hospitals that was set up in New York, they're remarkably similar in general design, because that is a design that can be managed by the fewest possible people. It's easy to set up, it's easy to take down, and it has everything you need to preserve the health of the patients, whether they're civilians in COVID or whether they're soldiers on a battlefield.
Well, I tell you another thing is about doctors and knowledge. So the Civil War medicine gets a bad rap in that the surgeons were butchers, and that they really weren't smart people. When you and I know that's just the opposite. That these guys, through being thrown into the fire, trying to figure out how to save lives. What fascinates me is kind of the similarity in, as smart as we have become, we still don't know about this virus. So that backs up to, how today obviously we're communicating with text. You can post a report immediately, and it goes on the World Wide Web. And if somebody comes up with a solution or even something that doesn't work, that knowledge is spread quickly. Talk about, I mean, the same thing was happening in the Civil War.
Oh yeah. We don't give credit enough in the Civil War for the fact that a circular letter put out by a surgeon, put out by a medical inspector, could literally hit all of the armies that were out there from, the East Coast all the way to the far western battlefields in Texas in a matter of days, not months or weeks. We have this idea months or weeks. We forget that General Grant outside of Petersburg was reading yesterday's New York newspapers. The information was getting to him pretty quick. And that was true of most of the country. We had methodologies for doing that even in the Civil War, and we were passing things around. What I find, though, is you mentioned the Civil War butchers. Oh, that's one of my favorite things. I always give the students trouble because invariably one of them will come up with a crutch, or come up on crutches, and I'll say, I'm certified in Civil War medicine. I can fix that for you. But how many times do we see in social media today, those doctors don't know what they're talking about? Well, they said this last week and they said this week. And people forget the fact that it's because we learned something new. It's because we have research now that says this. The whole thing on the medications, it's been back and forth until we got a good test where scientific method could truly be applied to which medications work and don't work. We were still back and forth, and it's not, again, they're blaming the doctors. Well, the doctors they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
We're learning. We're in the process of learning, just like you are in the public, and people don't give enough slack.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's it really makes you. It's the best, almost the best chemistry, biology lesson playing out in real time for people reading about it, because you have to look at the testing criteria. Now, who else before this, who would have even thought about that?
Right.
And that's another role that I'm seeing when you have the military medical community offer up an opinion. I know there's rigidity in those studies, and do you happen to know, like, with us being near Fort Detrick, have they pivoted a big portion of medical research to this, or are they still going about their business and have a special team, or do you know how that's organized now?
The only thing I know from that is there was a public briefing not too long ago with at the Pentagon, and the press was all involved. So I know that this information was carried by a lot of papers at the time, but I think it was kind of buried because that question is something that you and I want to know, and people who are going to watch a video like this are going to want to know that the general public may not have been as interested in. But the Army and the CDC and all the various universities have working groups that are working together. Now, I don't know particularly at Detrick because I don't know if you know, but they're transitioning from medical command to futures command. And what that means is they're looking at medical research and saying, we need medical research to take us into the future. We need to develop new technologies across all, from arms to armor to, boots and clothes and everything else. How do we research and develop that in a unified way? So a lot of Fort Detrick has moved over, even though they're doing health research, to the Futures Command. So I'm not quite as in touch with that as I might have once been, but I do know that the Secretary of the Army made it very clear that the Army is moving on this, again, because not only are we looking to protect the people of the United States, we also have to protect that fighting capability of the Army. So we always have to have, we've got to be out there looking for the solutions of that which is a threat. And this is a threat to both the civilian population and to the fighting force, Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, everybody. You can't function if your people are sick. And so I know that there's a push, but how much they've gotten completely off track, or how much it's just working groups, I'm not sure, but I do know they're involved.
Well, I also know, we've got a couple board members who are military folks, and I know that they're already studying the repercussions of this occurring and confirming the continuity of operations. And I think, again, that you talk about having to face something in a hurry, those aircraft carriers and the contained areas that you're describing of bases and everything to keep the armed forces safe. We're going to get a lot of lessons out of this that'll help us for years, I would think.
I think we really, I agree with you. I think we will. And one of the interesting things, so the Medical Center of Excellence, which is the old Medical Field Service School, and that's still really the function. It is where we train our enlisted. It's where we train our new medical officers. There's a whole training regimen there at all levels. And one of the things they were originally designed for was this idea of preserving the knowledge gained. And so my museum belongs to a slightly larger organization called the AMED Center for History and Heritage. And that's also under the school. And our historians and even the museum here, we were mandated very early on, exactly like back in 1862, when the Surgeon General said, we're going to use this war as a data point to train future generations of medical professionals. And everything we learned, we were told early on by the Army, you guys need to collect everything, all of the orders, all of the social media posts, all of the media and press that deals with the Army response, to make sure that we are going to put all this together so that we can learn from those lessons. And that's what our historians have been doing. And actually, we're even beginning to collect artifacts here at the museum specifically from the COVID response to make sure that we're going to be training the next generation of our medical professionals, just as we have for the last 100 years. We're going to train them. This happened. These are the lessons. Do this. Don't do that. Read more. And we're right there.
Well, I think Jake has a couple things he wants to pipe in about, but when we come back to our conversation, I want you to tell me about your new exhibit based on what you just described.
Oh yeah, no problem. I would love to.
All right, so think of this as sort of your commercial break. Jake coming in to give a shout out to those of you who have been tuning in with us and dropping comments. So hello to Andrea in Orlando. Thanks for tuning in, as always, to our videos. Hello to Scott, to Robert, to Rachel. I'll come back to Rachel in just a second. To Vicky, who's been here for many of our videos. To Brenda, same there. To Lynn Bristol, thank you, Lynn, for all of your support for the museum. To Gail, John, Scott comes back in to say that he has a man crush on George, so he's definitely one of those fanboys out there.
No, married.
And to Lori Frank, thanks so much, Lori, for tuning in.
Hey, Lori,
with us.
how are you? She actually is the person who founded your Letterman Institute Antietam staff ride. Oh my gosh. Awesome
yes,
to hear
wonderful,
from you, Lori.
wonderful supporter and connection for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. Thank you so much, Lori, for tuning in. To Abby, Gary, thanks for watching with us. Patricia, Jerry, Wendy, thank you all so much for tuning in. Craig and Nancy as well. A special shout out to go back up here to Rachel. Thank you so much, Rachel. Rachel donated to the museum while this video is ongoing.
Yay.
So thank you so much, Rachel, for doing that. If you're interested in supporting these videos, you can go over to the chat, go over to the comment section. You can find a link there to our support page where you can become a donor or a member of the museum. And trust me, every little bit helps these days. So thank you so much for tuning in with us. If you haven't yet, hit the like button or hit that share button. Consider doing that now, because that's going to help to support us as well. David, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Hey, I do want to say, something right to Lori Frank. She is turning pens now and turning making these awesome wood things that I keep up with that she makes on Facebook. And as you know, George, we have extra wood.
Woo.
Whoops.
Actually, Lori, will you make him a tripod for his phone? That would be
We lost George for
But anyway, we're going to get, while George is getting back on here, we have extra wood from the Clara Barton Museum And I keep meaning to send you some, Lori. I apologize for the delay because you had graciously volunteered to make some turned pins out of them, which we'll definitely take you up on. He's
There
back.
we are.
Good timing, sir.
I was being stupid. I was trying to find one of Lori's pens because it's in this desk drawer and I pulled everything over.
I figured you had
I
something
love
to
her
make.
pens.
Yeah.
Oh no, I have one of her U.S. Constitution pens. It's a fountain pen she made me, and I love it.
Hey, also to those watching this, if you have any observations where you've noticed some similarities between, what may have happened in the Civil War and what's happening now, please feel free to share those and we can talk about them or any questions. So George, you were telling me earlier this morning when we kind of touched base before this about a cool new donation that you got.
Yeah, we have one donation that just blew me away. So one of our local command units. So this is one of the MedCom or medical command units that went up to New York to both provide care but also administrative and logistical support. When the call came down, we as a nation we ran into this huge problem, and the huge problem was we don't just need masks for our hospital personnel and for our caregivers. We need masks for everybody. And that became a real problem for some of the units that were deploying. They had all the masks they would need for the normal run-of-the-mill operations of a hospital where they would need them while dealing with patients, but not for sitting around a desk working logistic problems or having meetings and other things. And this particular unit went to their families and their friends and they said, we need help. We need cloth masks. Here's a model. Can you make us a bunch of cloth masks? Well, let me tell you, I just happen to have one here that'll show you. So, everything in the military is either green, tan, or brown, right?
Yeah.
Check this one out. All different colors. So this is one of those masks. We had like 50 of them donated, and they're every conceivable color, pattern, you name it. And each one of the donors then wrote a card like this one that says who they were, who made the mask, and why it meant something to them. And some of them were, I remember one that it had horses all over it. The lady said, I'm from Montana. I grew up around horses, and my mom made me the mask out of a material with horses on it. And it reminded me of home. How many times we talked about that in Civil War medicine, the importance both for the patients and the caregivers to always have high morale, and thinking about home sometimes is part of that. Others wrote these beautiful things, like the commander of the unit with her, she said, I felt like Wonder Woman because this was my shield. This was the shield that I used to protect the innocent, because she said, I'm not going to be protected by this mask, but I'm going to protect other people with this mask. And she said, I was going into an environment where I knew that without the mask, wow.
Yeah.
I could cause problems. And she said, this was my Wonder Woman shield to protect others. And to have that kind of a collection, and we're going to display the whole collection at once. So it's going to be behind plexiglass to where all of this kaleidoscope of masks along with their comments. And I asked the public affairs sergeant in this unit, I said, would you do me a favor and interview some of the people who are giving us these masks?
Yeah.
And they actually talked about, as part of their oral history, they talked about what they experienced, what it was like. They were completely overwhelmed. You see all the time on Facebook, people say, well, I don't think the hospitals are really overwhelmed. That's not what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I'm talking to people who were there and they were overwhelmed, and they're getting overwhelmed again.
Yeah.
And so these people were talking about what these masks meant to them and what their service was like. And I have to say, I shared these masks with one of our soldiers who she just had completed her courses, and they were stuck here for lack of travel for a while. It's been a little slow getting people in and out because we have to take such care. They had to get her to Georgia for her first duty station. And she came to me at one point when she was volunteering here. We had a number of soldiers volunteer to come and help paint and clean up and trim bushes and all kinds of things we needed. And she looked at me one day and she said, Mr. George, what we're living through right now is a really important historical event. And she said, I was talking to one of my non-commissioned officers, one of the drill instructors, who had just got to New York. And he was telling us what it was like. And she said, these are lessons I can take to my first duty station and put to use the first day of my job. And I said, you're telling me you're going to learn from history? And she said, yes, sir, I am. Because this is how we make things better. And at that point, it's like, okay, if that's the only one I ever got to, everything we've done in this field was worth it.
Yeah.
She understood. And it's a very common thing to hear these soldiers saying, we're going to take this information you're providing us. We're going to take this information that our instructors are providing us, and we're going to put it to use to make sure that on day one, we're the best medical caregivers we can be. And that's worth everything to me.
Yeah. I mean, that's the purpose. And it's amazing to see a revelation like that. And when you truly connect to something in history, it can be transformational and have just a tremendous impact. Two things that I thought of when you were describing that donation and future exhibit is, number one, you can have old objects that are cool. A gun, a saddle, a surgical mask. But if you have a personal story that's associated with that object, it just takes it to a whole nother level. And all of a sudden it's a real thing, almost living and breathing, because you're hearing the words and the feelings of someone who lived before. And I think that's a key, that provenance or whatever for those individual objects. So, our first question whenever we get a donation, of course, as you would know, is, oh, where did it come from?
Yep.
And you need to know as many personal details about it. And the second thing that I thought of was, the feeling of being overwhelmed and people communicating that. That is so powerful and so strong and so necessary, because looking back as a historian, those are the things that really resonate, are those personal recollections.
So I want to throw, I'll throw something into the mix here that came from the comment section from Andrea. And Andrea, always thank you for commenting as always. But I'll just read this because I think this gets to the point. And this, when we all realize that we're living through a historical moment right now, and the connections those of us that are interested in history are drawing. So this is what Andrea wrote. I make masks. It makes me feel useful. A big part of this pandemic, for us civilians anyway, is the lack of control we have. I felt helpless because I'm not a medical professional and I have nothing to contribute. But now my sewing machine and I are doing what we can. And then she adds to that, and this is that historical connection. I think of the women on the home front rolling bandages, making quilts, etc. So there's a direct connection to our history. 155 years ago, women on the home front felt very much the same way that we all feel now. Those of us who aren't medical professionals, who aren't military medical professionals on the front lines, we still have a part to play. We're still a part of this drama. We're still a part of these events, and it's our stories that are going to make the history in the future that people are going to look back on. This is why me personally, and for those of you who've been watching these videos going back to March, know that I have been keeping a journal, a diary of my experiences here in Washington, D.C. during the pandemic. I'll tell you, my diary's gotten a lot more interesting in the last 2 weeks here in DC.
I'll bet.
But this is really important. We are living history right now. We are living a pandemic, a moment in our nation's history that we have not experienced, something unlike anything we've experienced in a century. We have to go back to 1918, 1919 to deal with a pandemic, to see a pandemic on the scale that we are dealing with right now across the world and in our country. So I think this is a really great discussion, and I just love that comment, and I wanted to bring it in. But it comes to this, idea of collecting things right now, of the history we are living in now, and connecting those objects, as George is talking about, David, as you were mentioning as well, connecting those objects with the stories, with the recollections, the experiences, and recording those for future generations, because people for centuries are going to look back on what we are doing right now and looking back on this moment, because it's that important to human civilization, what's happening right now as we speak.
Well, and she was inspired to make those masks to contribute. Look at what that did for Clara Barton, who was called to contribute in her own way, and from doing it single-handedly to forming the American Red Cross. And it was all driven probably for the same reasons as she's making masks now. And, you know, you can change the world, you know, you can, by getting involved. Go ahead.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you make the comment, because I look back on World War II a lot. It's something that I've spent a lot of time recently kind of researching and looking into, and that idea of mobilizing the whole country, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, scrap drives, you know, being part of rationing and being willing to raise a Liberty Garden. And we had that, or Victory Garden, and we had that in World War I. We had it in the Civil War. And, you know, in some of our more recent conflicts, because the number of soldiers that we have in the field are not as many, or not as large a percentage of the population as they were in those previous wars, I think there's been a great disconnect even between just the public and the idea that they can do something when they don't feel they have anything to contribute. And what I'm seeing now is the masks that were made by these families. I know hospitals have collected masks and other things that people have spontaneously made. I'm looking at the people in the community, like here in San Antonio, that came together because of COVID and started in larger numbers than had ever been done before, went to the food banks and said, what do you need? Because all these people, all my neighbors are out of work, and we can't have them all come in. How do we set up a food bank in a parking lot that's drive-through to make sure everybody's cared for? And these types of things are invaluable. Truly, that would make America different. Not every country has that kind of response. And to see that it's still part of our culture today, I think is vitally important to having hope in the future that things really haven't gotten too far out of hand. Yeah. You know, we still have people that are willing to say, what are we going to do? I know even here at the museum, when we first got shut down, I started providing nitrile gloves to the students and to the staff over at the center and school, because of course museums have them by the caseload, and they were running low because they couldn't get a quick supply in, and I could provide that. And so, you know, even I'm like, well, I want to go to New York and help. Well, I can't, but I can make sure that all the students have gloves, so when they're sanitizing surfaces, they're not passing diseases. And it was a wonderful experience for me, and I can only imagine how much greater it is, you know, when you can see your stuff put to use. And that's, you know, somebody who's not involved with an organization where they can just walk across the street and say, here, you need this, but can do it from their home. That's outstanding.
Yeah, and I'm even seeing it in our little community where the town and a local church and things are organizing even grocery delivery, or, you know, help mowing a yard for senior citizens. Just those small little things to help your neighbor. It is so much more refreshing and connecting than giving your opinion out there on social media. And
that's the truth.
And that juxtaposition always fascinates me. I mean, we are so in touch, but that channel of that allows us to be in touch makes us so out of touch with human interaction.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if I knew what to do about that, you know, I'd be rich and famous, but it makes me think of our first Zoom board meeting. It actually worked, which was surprising because we had a lot of people who didn't have a great experience on it. But it was a different kind of board meeting, because in this scenario of a Zoom versus Facebook or whatever, you had to pause, listen, and make sure there was a pause long enough for you to come in. Whereas that Facebook, you know, you can see the little dots of people, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right. And getting out there and actually being productive, I think, is so important for especially mental health right now. You know, we see from the letters from the home front in the Civil War that it often kept them sane and did offer them hope that they were contributing rather than just sitting back and watching. So we can't stress enough the importance of that. Talking about being conscientious of gathering objects and writing down your stories right now. Jake, first of all, you're gonna have to get some tear gas canisters or something to make part of your collection. But how do you see any obvious changes to interpretation for Civil War medicine or at your location? I mean, we've got the obvious ones right now where limited to 10 people, giving social distancing. One of the things that we had to go through and identify any hands-on exhibits that we had and see if we were going to adjust those or solve it by cleaning regimens. But I mean, I'm anticipating there's going to be some interpretive major overhauls and changes as well.
I think from our standpoint, the one thing I really want to look at, and again, look at my, the public for me is kind of secondary to my primary training role as a museum. So we have, a slightly different primary audience. And I think for me, one of the things I'm really looking at and interpreting is the importance of the organizational structure. And I'm actually looking back at Letterman, and I'm seeing that communication and organizational structure being played out every day. Every time I hear an Army briefing, every time I see how we're doing things, I'm seeing more and more relevance of his understanding of the need for as close to immediate, clear, concise communications within a medical structure and chain of command. And I'm seeing that the need for that again, and I'm seeing it play out as to how well it works. When somebody calls me on the phone and says, hey, what's going on as far as this or that? Can I have an event at the museum? How many people can I have at the museum? I really look back at Letterman's, the original October 1862 orders, where he said exactly what he wanted each one of his healthcare facilities on the battlefield. Every field hospital had to make a report. What's in the report and what time does the report have to be in so that he could disseminate information out from there. Well, the Army's run like that ever since. And medicine has run like that ever since. The Army worked that way before, but medicine didn't. Even Army medicine didn't. And now that it does, I am so thankful again, because this is a whole aspect I really hadn't thought of as being as important as I'm now seeing it is.
Yeah, and on the civilian side and the political end of that, it was very obvious, more so some days than others, that the great lesson to me in Civil War medicine era is the fact that you had these superiors. You had Lincoln McClellan appoint Hammond, who then appointed Letterman and said, do what you need to do, you'll have it. And basically you had great leadership that allowed these people to use their skills and talents to save lives, and then did exactly what they recommended. It was almost every day something was changing. People were second guessing, were contradicting each other. And that message in this kind of situation, imagine what would have happened in the Civil War if we would have had that situation. It would have been worse than the beginning of the war.
One of the things that I think I find really comforting from the standpoint of being on the inside of the Army is I feel like the information that we're getting is very clear. And I know that the information that we're getting is specifically designed to protect my life as a civilian employee, their lives, all of our student lives, and our instructors as either civilian or military personnel. And that the greater good of the country is really being considered with each decision. What do we have to do to make sure that we're not only not making ourselves sick, but how do we make sure that we can take care of those that we're charged to take care of? And it's that single-minded mission that just is so clear that I find so comforting here, because it simplifies everything. It's not, there's the politics are taken out of it. It's not about politics, and it's not about personal feelings, and it's not about who's going to get funding. For like you might have at a university. Well, I'm doing this research, but if you're doing that research, you might get my funding. And it's very simple. The daily orders that I get are there for one reason: preservation of life. That's it. And it really it just cuts through all the noise, and there's the answer. And great, give me what I have to do and I'll do it. And that's what I see every day.
So now that you're part of a museum that's not specific to the Civil War, and as you described, you guys go all the way back to the Revolutionary War, we finally, for a while, just as an example, we were talking about the Civil War being the first opioid crisis afterwards. But the reality is, then we learned, it might have been from your museum, that it happened in the Revolutionary War as well.
Mm-hmm.
In the spectrum of military medicine, do you still believe, being former executive director of this institution dedicated to Civil War medicine, do you still think it's the pivotal point, or how do you view it now that you've got a larger perspective?
Boy, do you trust me? Because I could say, well, no, actually, the Civil War meant nothing at all. I don't even know why you have that museum.
I think I still have your banjo. That might inspire you. No, I would be. We still have a strong. Whatever your answer is, we still got a strong enough story that.
Oh, absolutely. And let me just tell you, I look at the Civil War now as one of a series of watersheds. And where I see the watersheds coming, and it does change for me a little bit, organizationally, logistically, by command structure, by transportation, all of the things that I thought were important when I was there are still important. And the Civil War was the watershed that brought a lot of those things together. As a matter of fact, Scott Woodward, who's one of our, I like to mispronounce that because it makes him mad. I'll bet he's watching, because I think I saw a text from him earlier. We just call him Woody. Scott actually allowed me to get in on a project book that he's writing about Antietam. And let me tell you, it's the medical staff ride of Antietam, and it's everything that you and I have talked about the whole time that we were working together. And none of the importance of that has changed to me. What I do see is different are these various watersheds, the Civil War really being the first for me. And I'll give you an example. So the next big one in coming into World War I, you had the Spanish-American War, where for the first time, we're going to have to operate in environments we haven't really operated in before. Subtropical environments, really difficult, and well away from home, as far west as the Philippines and Guam. And that really taxed our logistics for the first time, and it prepared us for World War I. One of the great things I see coming out of World War I is the school that I work for now, where they said, okay, Hammond got it right back in 1862, and we have a medical school to make sure that our doctors are really being trained correctly, and that happened before the turn of the 20th century. But now we need a service school that's going to teach field medicine, where we can test new equipment and prove that the equipment works in the field before we deploy it. One of the first things they did was they used the lessons from World War I. In World War I, all of our bandages were wrapped in pasteboard, in cardboard. Well, that's great until you drop it in the water. Yeah. There goes the sterility. So in between the wars, the school at Carlisle developed a bandage called the Carlisle Bandage. The bandage itself wasn't anything particularly new, but they put it inside of a tin can that you unwound with a key like sardines, so that it was sterile. You could throw it in the ocean for 6 months and it'd still be sterile. So I see these watersheds. World War II, with our blood supply, being able to provide blood within days. Anywhere in the world, being able to provide blood within days of it being donated. You could get blood from Chicago, whole blood, and still get it fresh to the front. By aircraft transportation and basic refrigeration methods, you could get it to the Philippines, you could get it to Guam, same places we were just talking about with the Spanish-American War. We're able to deliver that blood. I saw a video recently that I was just fascinated. It was done by the Army in 1945, before the end of the war, saying, okay, you were injured at Iwo Jima this is what it's going to take to get you home to Chicago. And they followed every leg, what aircraft, how many hours in flight, how they were supporting you, and how many gallons of fuel, and how did they get you back to Pearl Harbor, then to Los Angeles, and then to Chicago? What personnel were used? What treatment methods are you getting? That's really the advent of modern flight nursing.
Yeah.
So I see these watersheds, and some of them are technological. In the 1870s, obviously, the changeover to an understood germ theory. But the Civil War hasn't diminished in importance to me because it's a framework upon which everything else is still built. If we didn't have the organization, all the blood in the world, we couldn't have gotten, that blood halfway across the Pacific Ocean if we didn't have a logistical organization and a command structure to back it up. And that started the Civil War.
So I got a question for you. Do you think that the fact we were in the 1860s and had these transportation systems, because I'm hearing logistics and getting things to and getting things back, and prior to that Revolutionary War, you were limited in your transportation options and mass production. I mean, that seems to be like maybe the key component.
In many ways, it's funny because Scott, who I was talking about, Woody, he and I teach a class, kind of co-teach. He teaches most of it. I make color commentary. I'm kind of the John Madden of the logistics course. And isn't that awful? But I'm his color commentator. And one of the things that we do is I listen to him, and he follows logistics from the Civil War right on through today. And it's amazing. Without that piece, without the transportation, and without truly understanding how to make the stuff flow and how to get it in the right order, packed correctly and all that, we'd be lost. And
you look at the lessons, you look at the lesson right now of the PPE, and then they're worried about how to get the vaccine. It's the same logistical kind of challenges. It's amazing.
And the Army has led the way since the beginning, really. We've led the way on military medical logistics. And one of the things that the Army's found out on several occasions is that medical logistics and non-medical logistics are different. And there has to be someone in the chain who truly understands the unique qualities of medical logistics and of medical products, and understands enough of that system to be able to take advantage, really, if you will, of all of the technologies we have in logistics and transportation, but make it work in such a way that the medical logistics are still taken care of correctly. Not everybody has to be a medical logistician, but we have to have those people embedded in the system, or it falls apart. And we know that from history.
Well, and that'll be my prayer after this conversation, is that as we develop these vaccines and need to get them administered to everyone, that the military medical community is in charge of that distribution.
Well, I got to tell you, whether they are or not, I would personally feel more comfortable that way too, only because I watch the system work every day, and it's a damn good system. And it's, again, it's what gives me hope for the future. I look at these students we're teaching, and they get it.
Yeah.
And wow, to know that they understand that history lessons are important, and to know that they're taking this information and they're putting it to use in the field, it makes me very hopeful for the future, because I see their smiling faces, and I know they not only understand, but they're highly capable, and they're getting a great education, and it's wonderful to watch.
Well, your legacy and Lori's legacy are still alive and well here as well, with our USIS programs and the capstones, and they are the most inspirational and exciting for our staff because of those very reasons. And it's just a really powerful thing. And we started saying the term, there's hope in history, and history offers hope, but only if you learn from it. And,
yes,
so when you see those moments, you can feel like, okay, that's why I like doing what I do. I would be probably ostracized by half the viewers here, and remiss if I didn't ask you if you're still building banjos.
Occasionally I am. I'm actually working on 2 right now. I'm building myself an 1865 Converse concert banjo, and I'm actually refitting the banjo I made for my father a long time before he died, and I wound up back with it, and I'm actually modifying it to kind of take all of the little things that I've learned since, in all the transport, in all the years gone by now. I'm kind of making it something that I wish I would have been able to have made for him back in the day, and I'm going to continue to play it. So, yep, I'm still out there making banjos and still doing my deacon thing and still doing historic woodworking. Now I'm also starting to restore historic statues for churches and things like that on the side. So I keep my hand in the artistic world.
Always something new. But I do have a good, I do need to ask you one thing. Do you know what the difference between an onion and a banjo is?
Well, nobody cries when you cut up a banjo.
Exactly.
I mean,
wow. Wow.
I'll give you one, Jake. Do you know what you call a banjo player at a waiters convention, or excuse me, at a musicians convention? I just blew it. Waiter. Yeah. Or here's the other one. What's the difference between a trampoline and a banjo?
Give up.
When you jump on a trampoline, you usually take your shoes off.
Wow. This is the part where I would expect all of the viewers to start running like rats from a sinking ship from this live stream.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're seeing a whole lot of people just dropping off very quickly.
Well, they just got a glimpse of every day that you and I work together. So that's
you know what's really sad, David? I walk in here and I say things like, "Hey, everybody, I got a great idea." You know what? They all run away just like you did.
La 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 la.
Exactly.
Well, Jake, do we have any other input or questions from our illustrious?
Yes. So I do want to give, before we get, I have a few questions and comments for George from the comment section. If you do have any other questions for George, or you want to yell at him about he and David's bad jokes, go for it in the comment section.
And I've got more.
There's always more. There's always more. Before we get to those, I do want to give a shout out to our newest member, Deborah. Thank you for joining during this stream and becoming a new member of the museum. Also want to thank Gary and Chris, who donated during the course of this conversation.
Excellent.
As well. If you want to support the museum like these wonderful folks did, you can go over to the comment section and you can find the link there, civilwarmed.org/support. You can become a donor and a member and support conversations like these. I do want to go over to comment section. Do have a few things in here that I want to address and throw your way, George. One of them is Lynn, a ways back, when you were talking about some of the Army medical research that's going on. I know you are working for an Army institution, you work for the Army, but she asked about if you had any awareness or knowledge of what is going on in terms of naval medical research or things that are going on there.
Unfortunately, I got to be honest with you, I don't. I do know that there is naval research out there. And actually, some of that naval research, what I can tell you, is actually happening over at Fort Detrick. There's one of those complexes that was built up just before I left, maybe a couple years before I left Frederick. And I think while I was still at the museum was predominantly Navy research, Navy medical research. And so there is. The one nice thing is they're all kind of intertied. They're all linked together. There's a lot of research too that happens down at the Uniformed Services University, the Health Sciences. And again, that's Army, Navy, Air Force, and Public Health Service. So a lot of them are intertwined, and yeah, the research is going on, but how much or in what subjects, yeah, I'm afraid I'm not up to speed.
All right, thank you. Another one going back to the start, and Andrea asked about some specific artifacts. I'm not going to get into those specifically, but I think on a relevant kind of note to her comments, you have a whole other collection down there at your base. What is your favorite artifact or object in your collection down there?
Oh gosh, I'm going to have to give you two answers. So my first one, when the country celebrated its 100th anniversary, there was a huge, almost like a World's Fair, but it was called the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. And the Army, as you can imagine, had a large display there. And they hired a pattern maker, and I wish I knew who it was. I wanted to do more research into it. And what that pattern maker did is he made exact scale models. And when I say exact, I mean these things are down to the nail. Reproductions of three, I think we've got 3 Civil War hospital cars that are about 4 feet long each, and ambulances. And they are absolutely perfect little scale models. I can't imagine how many thousands of hours went into them. And they're gorgeous. And to know that they were part of the exposition was incredible. But also to know that, hold on one second here while I make that go away. Somebody called in the middle. I guess they want to throw a question my way too. But it's just, that's an incredible piece, not only of Army medical history, but just of Americana to have something from the exhibition. Probably my other all-time favorite artifact is we have from World War II an oxygen meter. So when you go to the hospital now and they put the little thing on the end of your finger, it glows red, it tells how much oxygen's in your blood. Yeah, we have one of those from World War II.
Wow.
And it was developed for Bomber Command because they wanted to make sure that pilots at very high altitude were getting the right amount of oxygen. And it had a little light bulb in it, and we're missing the little light bulb, but everything else is there. And this thing is an analog, it's fairly good size, an analog oxygen sensor for blood. And you don't even think that World War II they would have had something like that. And yet here we were making sure that our pilots, and of course back then it was the US Army Air Corps, we were making sure that our pilots at high altitude had enough oxygen to function properly.
That's cool. I got a quick follow-up question. How big is your collection? Because I know you were very excited the first couple of weeks you were there that you had gotten, I think, your 9th helicopter or something.
Yeah, we were getting another one. Yes. So understand that our museum sits on about 7.5 acres, and we have, just on this location, we have 3 helicopters, 5 ground ambulances outside. I've got 4 ground ambulances inside. That doesn't include I've got a warehouse with 2 more World War II and another. We actually have 2 Model T ambulances from World War I. One of them that we drive around, and the other one sits inside. We also have a helicopter down at the command center that's under our control, but it's in the quad outside of the school. The size of the collection is interesting because the way the Army does it is a surgical kit is 1 item. So if you look at things like kits and everything else, I have just about 14,000.
Wow.
Now, if you look though into those individual things, like one of the items that we have is a collection of Vietnamese hospital instruments and drugs, all kinds of things that came out of a Vietnamese hospital during the Vietnam War, and it was actually collected by medical military intelligence to see what the capabilities were of the Vietnamese hospitals at the time. And that one collection is probably 500 items. Surgical instruments we can't even identify as to what they were for, that were handmade.
Yeah.
Drugs, and then what's interesting is you look and it's East German, it's Russian, it's Chinese, it's homemade, it's French, it's World War II American, hodgepodged all together. And it's a fascinating collection. So we have a lot of things like that. The best artifact, though, that we have of all, this will blow you away. It's a cardboard box with a hairdryer stuck in it, covered in that blue paper blankets that they put on you when you go under surgery.
Yeah.
And it's called the Chief Cutler. And it's written all over in black marker. what you realize is we had a product during the first Gulf War called the bear hugger. And what happens is if you lose a lot of blood all at once, you go into hypothermia, you go into hemorrhagic shock, and you lose your body temperature. Logistically, we had a problem. We didn't have enough bear huggers in the country at the time. And so a hospital called the 28th Cash put together a cardboard box covered in this blue stuff and stuck an Iraqi hairdryer in the top. And on the outside are the temperature readings of the people who came in: 86.9 degrees, 88.5 degrees, and then readings at each hour showing how their temperature was increasing until they were normal.
Wow.
Everyone is a living record of someone who didn't die that day.
Amazing.
And it's just a cardboard box.
There's power in material culture for sure. Well, George, I can't thank you enough for your time, and it was great catching up. And I am certain with the way the world is today that you and I could probably do this in about 2 weeks and have all new things to talk about.
And we lost George again. Okay, he's back.
And so Lori is going to have to come up with a better system. I'm sorry for folks for that, but I will develop a better system for doing this. I was going to bring my iPad, and that way the whole case drops over the back of my computer screen. And I thought I'd rigged up this really nifty brass thing, but I guess it wasn't nearly as nifty as I thought. So we'll have to do it again in 2 weeks, and I'll show you how much better I can do at mounting.
Anything else, Jake?
I just want to say a thank you to everyone who has tuned in with us today. If you haven't yet gone up and hit the like button, hit the share button. That helps more people to see this video even after we are offline. This video will also be made available, like all of our videos, on our YouTube channel. So you can go over to youtube.com/NMCWM. I'll also put that into the comment section after the video is over. You can subscribe. There's more videos over there that date back to the time that George was at the museum, back pre-2015. You can see lots of videos of George over there. I want to thank you all again for your support. Thank you to those who donated, to those who became members over the course of this stream. And if you haven't done that yet, I hope that you will consider doing it. At this point, you will be directly supporting conversations like these. So that's about it for me, David. I don't know if you or George have any last thoughts before we sign off.
Nope. I would just say, remember, history offers hope if you learn from it.
And I got to tell you, and I'd like to say this to everybody watching, David, I follow you guys on Facebook and in the news. What you and Jake and the whole staff are doing is really incredible. You've taken the museum in a fabulous direction, and I hope everybody on the board is properly proud of you and the whole staff for all you've done. I am honored to be able to say I once worked there, and that has never flagged. If anything, you make me look better and better every day.
Well, in all honesty, how hard is that, George? How hard is that?
That's true. That's pretty easy, actually. No, I love what you guys are doing, and I hope people will continue to support you, because you're right. Without history, we're lost. That's our hope, but we have to learn.
Well, I'm thankful that you're one of the most out-of-the-box thinkers I've ever known and greatest storytellers, and there's no way I could be doing a tenth of what I'm doing here without spending the time I did with you one office away. So it was one of the best times of my life, so I greatly appreciate it.
Well, hopefully you'll come down here. We'll have some tacos on the river walk together.
Sounds good.
No, that
have a good one, gentlemen.
Sounds so romantic. So what a great place! What a great place to leave this, at tacos on the Riverwalk.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in with us today. Again, become a member, become a donor, hit the like button, go over to YouTube and subscribe. We will see you on Wednesday. I'm going to be interviewing Emmanuel Dabney. He is curator at the Petersburg National Battlefield, and we're going to be talking about medical care at the Siege of Petersburg. So we hope you'll tune in. Stay tuned as well. We will be having information published soon about when we are going to be reopening. So stay tuned to the museum's website, civilwarmed.org, to our social media channels. We'll be updating that in the coming days about when we will actually be allowing people back into the museum. So we're really excited about that, and we hope to see you all very soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks.
and we're good. That was awesome.
Excellent.
I hope that was okay, David. I kind of ad-libbed that.
Yeah, I mean, I probably should have told you could have given the date, but that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I know we'll probably have some write-up on that soon that I can put up here so we can at least tease that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, George, thank you.
Sir.
Man, I can't thank you guys enough. This was a lot of fun. If you ever do want to do it again, let me know.
Yeah.
We definitely will. These are great. You help to bring us an audience that may not be following us or followed us before and hasn't been back in a while. So we appreciate that. I invited a bunch of people who liked the video who weren't followers of the museum to follow us. So new folks, which is great, and really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Not a problem.
We could, pick, if you have any interest in doing a topic, pick it, whether it's, the Antietam